The rain came down in sheets, drowning everything in its path. But Max, the German shepherd, stood unwavering at the threshold of the house. His fur was matted with water, his body trembling from the cold, yet he refused to move. The door was wide open, beckoning him to safety, but Max wouldn't step inside. His amber eyes stared at his owner, Captain Ethan Harris, who stood just a few feet away. Ethan's heart ached as he watched his loyal companion refuse the warmth that was so desperately needed. What could be so wrong, so powerful, that even a dog would resist the one place he knew was meant to be home? Ethan had been through much in his life, but seeing Max like this was a new kind of heartbreak. They had fought battles together, survived wars, and faced the horrors of the world side by side. But now, in the comfort of their own home, Max was acting as if something far worse than the war outside was at stake. Ethan took a step forward, hoping to coax him inside, but Max backed away, his eyes never leaving Ethan's face. This was more than just a refusal. It was as if Max was guarding him from something unseen but felt deeply by the dog. The silence hung heavy between them. Ethan could feel the weight of the air pressing down on him. It wasn't just the storm that loomed outside, but something far darker that seemed to close in on him. The moments stretched out, and Ethan's mind raced with possibilities. Was there a danger he couldn't see? Or was Max simply unwell? No, Ethan knew this dog too well. Max had always been the strong one, the protector, the one who never hesitated to put himself between danger and his loved ones. So why now? Why wouldn't he come inside? Ethan's breath hitched as his mind briefly wandered to the war, to the soldiers he had lost, to the loyalty Max had always shown him. He thought back to the countless nights they had spent together in the trenches, fighting side by side, each one trusting the other with their life. Max was more than just a dog to Ethan. He was a brother, a partner in ways no human could understand. Ethan crouched down, trying again to reach Max, but the dog remained still, his gaze unwavering, as though he was warning his owner of something far beyond his comprehension. The rain continued to fall, the world around them disappearing under the relentless downpour, but it was the storm inside that Ethan could not ignore. A storm of uncertainty, a storm of doubt. What was happening? Why wouldn't Max come inside? And as Ethan stood there, watching the dog, he realized something he hadn't before. Sometimes, the greatest battles are fought in silence, and the loyalty that holds you together is the quietest kind of strength. Tom took a deep breath, his eyes never leaving Max. The rain pounded on the roof, but the world outside seemed to fade away, leaving only the weight of the moment hanging between him and his dog. Max had always been the one to lead, the one who guided him through the darkest of times. Whether in the heat of battle or in the quiet moments when the noise of the world was too much to bear, Max had been his anchor. Yet now, standing in the doorway, Max refused to move, his amber eyes locked onto Ethan with an intensity that felt both protective and pleading. Ethan's heart ached as he slowly stepped back inside, never taking his eyes off Max. What could it be? What was keeping Max from entering? The dog had always been eager to please, quick to obey, but now he stood like a silent sentinel, unwilling to budge. The uncertainty gnawed at Ethan, pulling at him in ways he couldn't explain. He closed the door behind him, but his thoughts stayed with Max, out there in the rain. For hours, Ethan sat by the window, watching as the storm raged outside. He tried to shake off the feeling that something was terribly wrong, but the pit in his stomach wouldn't go away. Max had never acted like this before. He was always so sure, so steady. So what had changed? Ethan glanced at the clock, almost midnight. His thoughts raced as he stood up and walked toward the door again. He couldn't wait any longer. There had to be something, some explanation for Max's strange behavior. He stepped outside into the cold night, the rain hitting his face like needles. And there, standing still under the porch light, was Max. The dog's fur was soaked, but he didn't move. Max's head turned slowly, his gaze meeting Ethan's as if waiting for something, as if trying to communicate something that words could not. Ethan took a few steps forward, cautiously approaching his dog. "Max," he said softly, his voice barely audible above the storm. "What's wrong, buddy? Why won't you come inside?" Max let out a low whimper, his body trembling. For a moment, Ethan thought he saw something in the dog's eyes, something that spoke of fear. Fear of what? Ethan knelt down, extending a hand toward Max. The dog didn't pull away, but he didn't move closer either. It was as if Max was torn, caught between something he couldn't escape. Ethan's heart sank as he reached out, gently rubbing Max's head. The dog's fur was cold and wet, but it felt like the most comforting thing Ethan had ever known. It was then that he heard the faintest sound, a barely perceptible whine that came from the darkness beyond Max. Ethan's eyes widened as he stood up quickly, scanning the area around them. The storm made it difficult to see anything clearly, but the sound was unmistakable. Something was out there, something that had Max so unsettled, so unwilling to come inside. Ethan didn't hesitate. He turned and ran toward the sound, calling Max to follow. But Max stayed frozen, his eyes still locked on Ethan's, unwilling to move. Ethan's footsteps splashed in the mud as he made his way through the rain. Every instinct told him to be careful, to watch for danger, but his only focus was on the sound that had drawn his attention. There, in the shadows of the trees, he saw it, a small, shivering figure, half hidden by the underbrush. It was another dog, a pup, no older than a few months, trembling with cold and fear. Ethan's heart dropped as he crouched down, reaching out to the small creature. "Hey there," he whispered softly, trying to calm it. "You're safe now." The pup whined again, its eyes wide with fear. Ethan gently scooped the little dog into his arms, feeling the fragile body shudder against him. He looked back toward Max, whose gaze had not wavered. It was as if Max had been waiting for this moment, waiting for Ethan to find the pup. With the small dog safely in his arms, Ethan walked back to the house. Max followed, finally moving after what seemed like an eternity. They all entered the warmth of the house together, but Ethan knew, deep down, that this was only the beginning of something much bigger. Whatever had drawn Max to stay outside, to protect this pup, had changed everything. And Ethan wasn't sure if he was ready for what came next. The night seemed to stretch on forever as Ethan sat in the living room, holding the small pup in his arms. Max, now settled beside him, kept a watchful eye on the little creature, his body still tense, as if on guard. The rain had subsided, leaving only the soft patter of water dripping from the trees outside. Ethan ran his fingers through his hair, the weight of the night pressing down on him. What was it that had kept Max from entering the house? What was it about that pup that had unsettled him so much? The questions swirled in Ethan's mind, but there was no answer, just an unshakable feeling that something important was unfolding before him. Max, as if sensing his thoughts, let out a soft growl, his amber eyes flicking toward the door. Ethan followed his gaze, his heart racing. Something was out there. He stood up, the pup still cradled in his arms, and walked cautiously toward the door. Max followed, never straying far from Ethan's side. As they reached the door, Ethan hesitated. The house was quiet now, but the world beyond felt different, as if it were holding its breath. The rain had stopped, but the air was thick with an unspoken tension. Ethan stepped outside, Max right behind him. The cool air felt heavy on his skin, and the ground beneath his feet was still damp. The darkness seemed to stretch on forever, the shadows deep and thick, hiding what Ethan couldn't see. As he moved further into the yard, the pup in his arms squirmed, letting out a small whine. Ethan held it close, trying to comfort it. Max, however, had stopped, his body rigid, his ears perked. Ethan turned to look at him, his heart pounding. What was it that Max was sensing? The dog's gaze never wavered, and Ethan followed his line of sight. In the distance, a shadow moved, barely visible in the moonlight. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. He knew there was something out there, something that Max had been trying to warn him about all along. Slowly, cautiously, Ethan approached the shadow. His eyes narrowed as he tried to make out its shape, but it was too dark, too far away. Max stood beside him, his body low to the ground, ready to spring into action at a moment's notice. Ethan could feel the tension in the air, the silence around them growing thicker with each passing second. Suddenly, the shadow moved again, and this time, Ethan saw it clearly. It was another dog, stumbling toward them, its coat matted with dirt and debris. Ethan's heart sank as he recognized the look of desperation in the dog's eyes. Without thinking, he dropped to his knees, placing the pup gently on the ground. Max stayed close, watching the new dog closely. Ethan reached out, his hands shaking slightly as he took the dog's trembling body into his arms. It was cold, its body thin and weak, and it had clearly been through a lot. The poor thing was covered in scratches, its fur caked with mud. Ethan could feel its shallow breathing, and he knew that if they didn't get it inside soon, it wouldn't survive the night. He stood up, the dog still cradled in his arms, and turned back toward the house. Max followed, never leaving Ethan's side, his eyes constantly scanning the surroundings. It wasn't until they were back inside, the doors safely shut behind them, that Ethan allowed himself to breathe a little easier. He set the dog down gently on the floor, where it curled up, exhausted and shivering. Max lay down beside it, keeping a watchful eye on the new arrival. Ethan stood there for a moment, taking in the quiet of the house. The storm had passed, but the weight of the night still lingered. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain. Max was not just a dog. He was a protector, a loyal companion, and the bond they shared was something that couldn't be broken. Ethan ran his fingers through his hair again, his mind still reeling from the events of the night. He looked down at Max, who had already fallen into a light sleep beside the other dog. For the first time in a long while, Ethan felt a sense of peace. There was no danger now. They were safe. But even as he allowed himself to relax, he couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was at play here, something that he and Max had yet to understand. The house was quiet now, the only sound the soft breathing of the dogs lying beside the fire. Max, ever vigilant, kept a close eye on the new arrival, the fragile pup that had found its way into their home. Ethan sat in his favorite chair, the warmth of the fire casting a golden glow across the room, but his mind was elsewhere. The events of the night were still fresh in his mind, and he couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to Max's strange behavior. The dog had always been a protector, but tonight had been different. There was an urgency in his actions, a sense of something larger than just the two of them. Ethan glanced over at the pup, curled up in a blanket on the floor, its small body still trembling despite the warmth. He wondered what had happened to it, where it had come from, and why Max had led him to it. The dog was not one for coincidences. Max's instincts were too sharp, too finely tuned for that. It had been clear from the start that the dog was trying to tell him something. But what? As the fire crackled and popped, Ethan leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. He couldn't remember the last time he had felt so uneasy, so uncertain. The world outside was still a mess, the storm having passed, but leaving behind a trail of chaos. Yet inside, in the safety of the house, the tension had only grown. Ethan knew he couldn't ignore the bond between Max and the pup, the way they seemed to understand each other without words. It was as if Max had been waiting for the right moment, for Ethan to be ready, to find the little one and bring it into the warmth of their home. The thought made Ethan uneasy, but there was a deeper sense of responsibility stirring in him. He had always believed in protecting those who couldn't protect themselves, and tonight, it was clear that he had a new mission. His eyes drifted to the window, where the remnants of the storm still clung to the trees outside. The rain had stopped, but the air was thick with tension, as if the world was holding its breath. He thought about what had brought them here, about the years of service, the sacrifices, the losses. Everything had led him to this point, this quiet moment in the middle of a storm. And now, with Max by his side, Ethan knew that his journey wasn't over. There was still work to be done, still people and animals who needed him. The pup stirred in its blanket, letting out a soft whimper, and Max immediately rose from his place by the fire, his ears alert. Ethan stood up as well, his gaze focused on the small creature. Max padded over to the pup, nuzzling it gently with his nose. The pup responded with a weak wag of its tail, but the fear in its eyes hadn't fully faded. Ethan moved toward them, kneeling down beside Max and the pup. The bond between them was undeniable, and for a brief moment, everything felt right. This was what he had been trained for, what he had fought for. To protect, to care, to offer a second chance. He reached out to the pup, gently stroking its fur, and felt the tiniest flicker of warmth return. It was a small victory, but it was enough. As Ethan sat back on his heels, watching the two dogs interact, a sense of peace washed over him. The world outside might still be a dangerous place, but inside, in this moment, they were safe. The tension in his chest began to ease, and for the first time that night, he allowed himself to relax. Max had done what he always did. He had led the way, guided him through the storm, and showed him that there was still hope, even in the darkest of times. Ethan knew that their journey was far from over, but for now, in the warmth of the firelight, with the dogs beside him, he was content. He had found something that night, something more than just survival, more than just the bond between a man and his dog. He had found a new purpose, a reason to keep going, to keep fighting for those who needed him most. And as Max settled back down by the fire, his watchful eyes never leaving the pup, Ethan smiled to himself. This was just the beginning. The days that followed were quieter than Ethan had expected. The storm had passed, and with it, the feeling of impending danger that had hung over the house. Max, ever the vigilant protector, seemed at ease again, but Ethan couldn't shake the nagging sense that there was something more at play. The pup, now named Scout, was slowly recovering. It had begun eating, its little body gaining strength each day, though it still trembled with fear at times. Max, however, had taken to the pup as though it were his own. He stayed close, guarding it, never letting it out of his sight. Ethan watched them from his chair by the fire, the warmth of the room contrasting sharply with the cold outside. He had never imagined himself in this situation, playing the role of protector not just for Max, but now for this small, fragile creature that had wandered into their lives. His mind drifted back to the moment when Max had refused to come inside, when the dog had led him to the pup, and he realized that Max had known something. The dog had sensed the need, the call for help, and had guided Ethan without hesitation. Ethan's gaze shifted to the window, where the sky had cleared, revealing a bright, cloudless day. It was hard to believe that only a few days ago, the world had seemed so dark, so uncertain. But now, with the storm behind them, Ethan could breathe easier. He knew that their lives were about to change, but he wasn't sure in what way. As Max lay beside Scout, his head resting on his paws, Ethan felt a sense of gratitude that he hadn't felt in a long time. The bond between him and Max had always been strong, but watching the dog take on the responsibility of caring for Scout filled him with a new understanding of what it meant to be a protector. He wasn't just a Marine, he was a part of something bigger. His duty to Max, to Scout, was just as important as any mission he had ever been on. Max stirred as if sensing Ethan's thoughts. The dog raised his head, his amber eyes meeting Ethan's with a look of quiet wisdom. It was as if he was reminding Ethan that he was never alone. Scout, still a little uncertain, but growing more confident each day, finally ventured out from the blanket, taking small, cautious steps. Max followed, his body low to the ground, always watching, always ready. Ethan smiled softly, his heart swelling with pride. It was clear now, Max had known that the pup needed them, and he had led Ethan to it, not just to save it, but to teach him something about loyalty, about the bond that can exist between man and animal. Ethan stood and walked over to where the two dogs were now sitting, watching the outside world with a sense of calm that had been absent before. As he crouched down to pet them both, he realized that this was a new chapter in his life, one that he hadn't expected but was ready for. Max had shown him the way, and together, they had found something worth protecting. The storm had passed, but the journey was far from over. Max, Scout, and Ethan were a team now, bound by something stronger than the past. They were family, and whatever came next, they would face it together, as a pack. The days grew warmer as spring slowly began to make its presence known. Ethan found himself settling into a new routine, one that included not just Max, but Scout, who was growing stronger with each passing day. The little pup had started to explore more, his steps hesitant but determined, as if he was testing the world around him. Max, ever the patient mentor, stayed close, guiding the pup with quiet care, his every movement calm and deliberate. Ethan watched them from the window, his heart swelling with pride. He hadn't expected this, hadn't expected to find a new purpose in the midst of his own struggles. But here he was, watching as his two companions bonded in a way that seemed almost mystical. Max had always been a source of strength for Ethan, but now, with the addition of Scout, something new had formed between them. It was a bond of protection, of loyalty, and of love. Ethan walked over to where the dogs lay on the floor, their eyes closed in contentment. The house, which had once felt so empty, now felt full of life, of purpose, of connection. As he sat down beside them, Max lifted his head, his amber eyes meeting Ethan's with a knowing look. It was as if Max understood the weight of the change that had come to their lives. as if he could sense that this was a new chapter, one that they would face together. Scout, noticing the shift in energy, stood up and stretched, his small body still clumsy, but growing more confident each day. Ethan smiled and reached out to pet both of them, his hand gently running over Max's familiar coat before moving to Scout's softer, still growing fur. The pup nuzzled his hand, a soft sound escaping his throat, and Ethan felt a warmth spread through him. It was moments like these that reminded him of the strength of the bond between them. It wasn't just about the physical acts of rescue or protection. It was about the quiet moments, the understanding without words. Ethan stood up, feeling the weight of the day ahead. There was work to be done, chores to be finished, but in that moment, he realized that the work didn't feel like a burden anymore. It felt like a calling. Max had always been his partner, and now Scout was part of their team, part of their family. As he moved toward the door to start his day, Max and Scout followed him without hesitation, side by side, the trio forming a united front. They had been through so much together, and yet, in this new chapter, they had become something even more. They weren't just two dogs and their owner. They were a pack, a family, bound together by something deeper than just survival. They were bound by loyalty, by love, and by the understanding that, no matter what came next, they would face it together. Ethan opened the door and stepped outside, Max and Scout close behind him. The sun was shining brightly, the world around them beginning to come to life with the promise of a new day. Ethan took a deep breath, feeling the cool air fill his lungs, and for the first time in a long while, he felt truly at peace. He didn't know what the future held, but with Max and Scout by his side, he knew he was ready to face it. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together as a family. The days turned into weeks, and Ethan had begun to find a new rhythm in his life. Max and Scout were inseparable, their bond growing stronger each day. Max, the ever-watchful protector, seemed to have found a new purpose, not just as Ethan's companion, but as the guardian of this little pup who had entered their lives so unexpectedly. Scout, though still small and fragile, was now full of energy, his playful antics often making Ethan smile. It was hard to believe that only a short time ago, the pup had been a trembling, weak creature, lost and alone. Now, Scout was learning, growing, and beginning to understand the world around him, with Max as his patient teacher. Ethan had always believed in the power of loyalty and companionship, but watching Max take on the role of protector for Scout was something new. It was as if the dog had instinctively known what was needed and had stepped into the role without hesitation. Max's actions spoke louder than any words ever could. Every day, Ethan saw how much the dog had to offer, not just in terms of protection, but in the quiet way he cared for Scout. It was in the way Max stayed close to the pup, guiding him through the unfamiliar world. It was in the way Max would nudge Scout when he strayed too far, gently bringing him back. Ethan found himself marveling at the depth of Max's loyalty, and at how effortlessly he had adapted to his new role as a protector of not just his human, but of this little, lost soul who had found its way into their lives. One afternoon, Ethan decided to take Max and Scout on a walk through the woods near their home. It was a peaceful place, the trees standing tall and proud, their leaves rustling in the gentle breeze. As they walked, Max led the way, his steps confident, while Scout, still learning, trotted beside Ethan, occasionally stopping to sniff at the ground or chase after a fluttering butterfly. Ethan smiled to himself, the quiet of the woods giving him a sense of calm that he hadn't felt in years. The weight of his past, the memories of his time in the military, seemed to meld away with every step. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't thinking about the past. He wasn't thinking about the battles he had fought or the men he had lost. He was simply present, in the moment, with the dogs who had become his family. As they made their way deeper into the woods, Max stopped abruptly, his ears pricked, his body tense. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He had learned to trust Max's instincts, and when the dog reacted this way, it was a sign that something was off. Ethan took a slow step forward, scanning the area around them. The air was still, the birds quiet. And then, from behind a thick patch of brush, came a low, eerie growl. Ethan froze. Max stood between him and the sound, his body low to the ground, ready for whatever was coming. Ethan's pulse quickened, but he stayed calm. He had trained for moments like this, moments when uncertainty filled the air. He glanced down at Scout, who had stopped by his side, looking up at him with wide eyes, sensing the tension in the air. Max moved slowly, his movements deliberate, as if waiting for the right moment. The growl came again, closer this time, and Ethan's heart raced. It wasn't the growl of a dog, but something much larger, more menacing. Max didn't flinch. He stayed in position, never taking his eyes off the direction of the sound. Ethan's grip on the leash tightened, but he didn't move. The tension in the air was thick, and for a moment, everything was still. Then, out of the brush, stepped a large figure, its body dark against the light filtering through the trees. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. A bear, tall and powerful, stood a few yards away, its eyes locked onto Max. But Max didn't retreat. He stood his ground, his stance unwavering. The bear sniffed the air, its massive head turning slightly. Max growled low in his throat, a sound that sent a chill through the air, but he didn't move. Ethan's mind raced. He knew they couldn't fight the bear, but he also knew that Max was trying to protect him. It was in moments like these that Ethan realized just how much the dog meant to him. Max wasn't just a companion. He was family. He was the one who would always be there, no matter the odds. The bear stared for a few moments longer. Then, as if deciding that the three of them weren't worth the trouble, it turned and lumbered back into the woods, disappearing as quickly as it had appeared. Ethan let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. Max's growl subsided, and the dog turned to him, his eyes calm, as if nothing had happened. Scout, on the other hand, was still looking in the direction of the bear, his small body trembling slightly. Ethan knelt down and stroked Scout's fur, reassuring him. He then turned to Max, his heart filled with gratitude. "Good boy, Max," he whispered, the words barely a breath. Max wagged his tail once, as if to acknowledge the praise. They had faced something together, and as they continued their walk through the woods, Ethan knew that whatever came next, they would face it as a team. As the days passed, Ethan, Max, and Scout settled into a life that felt more like a home than ever before. The three of them had found a rhythm, a balance between the calm of the woods and the hustle of everyday tasks. The bond they shared, unspoken yet powerful, had deepened in ways Ethan hadn't anticipated. Max, always the leader, guided them with unwavering confidence, while Scout, still young and learning, followed with eager steps. It was clear that Max had taken on the role of a protector not just for Ethan, but for Scout as well. It was a quiet kind of protection, the kind that didn't need words, only actions. Max's every move was deliberate, calculated, and filled with purpose. Ethan could see it in the way Max watched over Scout, in the way he would nudge the pup away from danger or gently nudge him forward when he hesitated. It was as if Max knew exactly what Scout needed, and without hesitation, he provided it. Scout, for his part, was thriving. The little pup had grown stronger, more confident with each passing day. His once trembling body now moved with a sense of purpose, a newfound courage that could only come from the love and protection he had received. Ethan watched as Scout explored the yard one afternoon, his tail wagging as he chased after a butterfly. Max, as always, was nearby, keeping a watchful eye on his younger companion. Ethan couldn't help but smile at the sight. It was moments like these, simple and serene, that reminded him of what really mattered. Life had a way of throwing challenges at you, of testing your strength and resolve. But in these quiet moments, with Max and Scout by his side, Ethan felt a peace he hadn't known in years. He hadn't always believed that life could be this simple, that happiness could come from something as straightforward as a dog's loyalty. But now, with Max and Scout in his life, he understood. They had shown him what true companionship meant. They had shown him what it meant to be a family. That afternoon, as the sun began to set, casting a golden light across the yard, Ethan sat on the porch, his heart full. Max lay at his feet, his eyes still watchful, while Scout, exhausted from his play, curled up beside him. Ethan looked out at the horizon, his thoughts turning to the future. There was still so much uncertainty in the world, so much that could go wrong. But as long as he had Max and Scout, as long as they had each other, he knew they would face whatever came their way. They were more than just a man and his dogs. They were a family, bound by loyalty, love, and a shared sense of purpose. And for the first time in a long while, Ethan felt a deep sense of gratitude for the life he had built. He had found something worth protecting, something worth fighting for. As the last light of the day faded and the stars began to emerge, Ethan leaned back in his chair, letting the peace of the night wash over him. Max's steady breathing beside him, the gentle rustling of the leaves in the breeze, the soft warmth of Scout's body next to his. Everything felt right. Whatever the future held, Ethan knew that he was ready. Together, they could face anything. The days grew warmer, and as the seasons changed, so did the life that Ethan had come to cherish. Max and Scout continued to thrive, their bond stronger than ever. The once hesitant pup had transformed into a playful and curious dog, his energy a perfect match for Max's steady guidance. Together, they made a perfect pair, their personalities complementing each other in a way that felt almost fated. Ethan, watching them from the porch one evening, couldn't help but smile. The sight of Max gently guiding Scout through the yard, showing him the ropes of the world, filled him with a deep sense of contentment. It was a quiet, simple life, but it was a good one. As the months passed, the bond between them deepened. Scout had become more than just a pup he had saved. He had become part of their family. Ethan often found himself lost in thought, reflecting on how far they had come. Just a few months ago, his life had been filled with uncertainty, the weight of his past hanging heavy on his shoulders. But now, with Max by his side and Scout at his feet, everything seemed right. The scars of his past no longer felt so sharp. The loss of comrades, the pain of war, seemed distant. Max had always been a constant in his life, but Scout had brought something new, a sense of hope, of new beginnings. One evening, as they all sat together on the porch, Ethan thought about how much had changed. The storm that had once seemed so ominous now felt like a distant memory, overshadowed by the warmth and peace they had built. It was hard to believe how far they had come. He had never imagined himself in a place like this, a place where he could truly feel at peace. Max and Scout had become more than just dogs. They had become his family, his anchors in a world that had once felt unpredictable. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden hue over the yard, Ethan felt a deep sense of gratitude. The world outside still had its challenges, still had its uncertainties, but here, with Max and Scout, he felt ready for whatever came next. They had been through so much together, and their bond had only grown stronger with time. Ethan reached down and scratched Max's head, the dog's tail wagging in response. Scout, ever the curious one, nuzzled against Ethan's leg, his small body still carrying the innocence of a pup, but the courage of a dog who had found his place in the world. Ethan couldn't help but chuckle as Scout tried to chase a falling leaf, his playful antics never failing to make him smile. For a brief moment, Ethan allowed himself to fully embrace the peace that surrounded them. It was a moment of quiet joy, a reminder of what really mattered. He had spent so much of his life fighting, protecting, surviving. But now, in this simple moment, with his dogs beside him, he realized that he had finally found a home. The future was still uncertain, but with Max and Scout by his side, Ethan knew they could face anything that came their way. Together, they were unstoppable. The love and loyalty they shared were stronger than anything life could throw at them. And as the night settled in, with the stars twinkling above and the soft sounds of the night surrounding them, Ethan knew he was exactly where he was meant to be. The autumn months brought a new sense of rhythm to Ethan's life. The crisp air filled with the scent of fallen leaves, and the golden hues of the trees cast long shadows on the ground. Ethan, Max, and Scout had settled into a peaceful routine. The days were spent walking through the woods, tending to the small garden Ethan had started, and spending quiet evenings together on the porch. Life had become simple, yet fulfilling, in a way that Ethan had never imagined. Max had adapted seamlessly to the new pace of life, his protective nature still evident, but now tempered by a calm that came with the safety of home. Scout, always curious, had grown into a brave and adventurous dog. He would run ahead during their walks, then turn back to check on Ethan, his tail wagging in excitement. It was hard to believe how much the pup had transformed since that first day they found him shivering in the rain. Ethan often found himself reflecting on how everything had changed. He had come to realize that peace wasn't something that could be forced, it was something that had to be embraced. And with Max and Scout, peace had finally come. One afternoon, As the sun began to dip behind the trees, Ethan sat on the porch, watching Max and Scout play in the yard. The two dogs chased each other in circles, their joy infectious. Ethan chuckled to himself, the sight of them so carefree bringing him a sense of calm he had never known. He had been through so much in his life, yet in this moment, with the dogs by his side and the warmth of the house behind him, he felt like he had finally found his place. Max came over to him, sitting at his feet, looking up with those deep amber eyes. Ethan reached down to pet him, his hand running through the dog's thick fur. Scout followed, curling up beside him, resting his head on Ethan's lap. The three of them sat in silence, watching the stars slowly appear in the night sky. For the first time in a long time, Ethan didn't feel the weight of the past bearing down on him. The pain, the loss, the uncertainty of the future, all of it seemed distant, washed away by the simple, quiet moments he now shared with Max and Scout. As the night grew colder, Ethan stood up, stretching his stiff muscles. He gave Max and Scout one last pat before heading inside. The fire was crackling in the hearth, and the warmth of the house welcomed him as he stepped in. Max and Scout followed, their paws clicking softly on the wooden floor as they settled in their spots by the fire. Ethan sat down in his favorite chair, his eyes drifting over the room, taking in the cozy space they had made together. It wasn't much, but it was home. It was everything he needed. The future was still uncertain, but with Max and Scout by his side, Ethan knew that he was ready to face whatever came next. The three of them had formed a bond, a family, that could weather any storm. And in that moment, Ethan realized that this was the life he had always been searching for, not the one filled with battles and struggle, but the one filled with quiet moments of joy and the love of his two loyal companions. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes closing for a moment as the warmth of the fire surrounded him. The sounds of the night faded away, and all that remained was the soft breathing of Max and Scout, a reminder that, for the first time in years, Ethan had found a sense of peace. The seasons continued to shift, and with each passing day, Ethan found himself growing more accustomed to this new chapter of his life. The peace that had settled over their home was unlike anything he had experienced before. The soft rustling of leaves, the distant call of birds, the sound of Max and Scout playing in the yard. These simple moments filled him with a sense of contentment he hadn't realized he was missing. The world outside remained unpredictable, but inside his home, there was stability, a calm that he had longed for. Max and Scout were no longer just companions. They had become his family, his anchor in a world that often felt uncertain. One chilly morning, as the sun began to rise, Ethan stood on the porch, taking in the crisp air. The first frost of the season had settled on the ground, and the trees shimmered in the early light. Max stood beside him, his tail swishing gently, while Scout, still young and full of energy, ran circles around them. Ethan chuckled to himself as Scout pounced at the frost-covered ground, clearly fascinated by the new world before him. He bent down to scratch Max behind the ears, feeling the warmth of the dog's fur against his hand. The bond between them, built on years of shared experiences, had only deepened. And now, with Scout by their side, that bond felt even more meaningful. As the day unfolded, Ethan found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought him here. The past had been filled with challenges, with moments of loss and uncertainty, but those moments had shaped him. They had prepared him for this life, for the calm that now surrounded him. Max had always been his rock, the constant companion who had never wavered, and now, Scout had come into their lives like a new beginning, a reminder that no matter how difficult things had been, there was always room for growth, for change, and for healing. That evening, as the sky turned a deep shade of purple and the stars began to appear, Ethan sat on the porch again, Max and Scout by his side. The warmth of the fire crackled inside the house, but the cool night air felt refreshing, as if the world itself was breathing a sigh of relief. Max lay at Ethan's feet, his eyes still watchful, while Scout snuggled close, his small body warm and content. For the first time in a long time, Ethan felt truly at peace. The future, though still uncertain, didn't seem as daunting as it once had. He had Max and Scout, two loyal companions who had become his family, and together, they had weathered storms, both literal and figurative. As the night deepened and the fire inside flickered softly, Ethan knew that he was ready for whatever lay ahead. He wasn't alone anymore. He had found something that was worth fighting for, something that gave him a sense of purpose. It wasn't the grand battles or the distant memories of his past that defined him now. It was the simple moments, the quiet ones, the ones that came with a wagging tail, the soft purr of contentment, and the feeling of home. Max, Scout, and Ethan, they were a team, a family bound by loyalty, love, and the unspoken understanding that, together, they could face anything the world had to offer. The first snowfall of the season came quietly, covering the earth in a blanket of white. Ethan woke early, the cold air creeping through the cracks of the old house, but the warmth of Max and Scout beside him made the morning feel peaceful. The world outside looked different, transformed by the snow that seemed to soften everything it touched. Max, as usual, was already awake, his steady presence next to Ethan, his amber eyes scanning the room. Scout, ever the curious one, stirred as well, his small body shifting in the bed where they had both curled up the night before. Ethan smiled softly, reaching down to scratch Max behind the ears before gently nudging Scout, who yawned and stretched, then blinked up at him with sleepy eyes. The house was still, the only sound the gentle breathing of the dogs and the faint crackle of the fireplace in the next room. Ethan rose from the bed, the cool air of the house greeting him, and opened the window to let in the morning light. The snow outside was pristine, untouched, and the world felt calm, like it was holding its breath in anticipation. Max trotted over to Ethan's side, his tail wagging slightly, and Scout followed, his little paws leaving soft prints in the snow as he ventured closer to the window. Ethan leaned down, giving Max a final pat on the head before walking over to the fireplace to start the fire. The warmth from the flames began to spread throughout the house, and soon Ethan was joined by Max and Scout, both curling up beside him as he settled into his favorite chair. He couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude. Life had changed so much in the past year. From the uncertainty and the weight of the past, to this quiet, simple life filled with love and companionship. He had never imagined finding peace in the way he had, never thought that his healing would come through the presence of two loyal dogs who had become his family. Max had always been there for him, but now Scout had become a part of their story, a piece of the puzzle that had made everything feel whole. The stillness of the morning felt sacred, as though the world outside was giving him a moment of clarity, a reminder that no matter what challenges lay ahead, he had what he needed right here. Max and Scout. Family. The fire crackled softly, the scent of pine wood filling the room, and Ethan leaned back in his chair, allowing himself to relax. He thought about the road ahead, the future, and the uncertainty that still lingered in the back of his mind. But for the first time in a long while, he wasn't afraid. He had Max, he had Scout, and together, they would face whatever came next. Life was unpredictable, but in this moment, Ethan knew that he had everything he needed to keep moving forward. The snow outside continued to fall, covering the world in its soft embrace, and Ethan, Max, and Scout sat together, wrapped in the warmth of their home, content in the peace that had finally found them. As the winter days began to shorten and the first signs of spring started to show, Ethan found himself reflecting on the life he had built with Max and Scout. The quiet, steady rhythm of their days had become a source of comfort. The peaceful walks in the woods, the quiet evenings by the fire, the simple moments spent in each other's company had filled a part of him that he hadn't even realized was empty. Max, now older and more experienced, had become even more protective, always staying close by Ethan's side. His eyes, once filled with youthful energy, had taken on a wise, knowing look. He still had the same strong presence, but it was now tempered with a calmness that only years of loyalty and service could bring. Scout, too, had blossomed. The pup that once trembled in fear now held himself with more confidence, his once clumsy steps now sure and steady. He had learned so much from Max, following the older dog's lead, mirroring his movements, his actions, and his steady strength. Ethan smiled at the sight of them together, the two dogs side by side, their bond unspoken yet strong. It had become a family, the three of them, in a way that Ethan had never expected. It wasn't just about the protection they offered each other. It was the quiet understanding, the deep connection that had formed over time. They had shared so many moments, so many small victories, and had become something more than just a man and his dogs. They were a pack. One evening, as the sun set and the sky turned a deep shade of pink and orange, Ethan stood on the porch, watching the two dogs in the yard. Max was lying in the grass, his head resting on his paws, his eyes half closed as he enjoyed the warmth of the sun. Scout, always full of energy, darted around, chasing the last few butterflies of the season, his tail wagging excitedly. Ethan felt a sense of peace wash over him, the kind of peace that came from knowing that no matter what, they were all together. He had found something he hadn't known he was looking for, a family, a place where he truly belonged. The memories of his past, the battles he had fought, the losses he had suffered, all of that seemed distant now. It wasn't that they had disappeared, but they had faded into the background. They no longer defined him. What defined him now was the love and loyalty of Max and Scout. As the days continued to lengthen, bringing with them the promise of warmer weather, Ethan realized that his journey was far from over. But it wasn't a journey filled with the uncertainty and fear of his past. It was a journey that was filled with hope, with love, and with the certainty that, as long as he had Max and Scout by his side, he could face anything. The future didn't seem so daunting anymore. It was full of possibility, full of new experiences, and full of the quiet moments that made life worth living. As the stars began to twinkle in the sky that night, Ethan leaned back in his chair, looking up at the vastness of the universe. The world was big, and sometimes it felt overwhelming. But right here, in this moment, he had everything he needed. He had Max, he had Scout, and he had a life that was worth living. With them by his side, Ethan knew that he was never truly alone. They were his family, and together, they would face whatever came next.